Hello everyone. I know many of you have been waiting very patiently for this next part, and we are finally diving into the next deadly sin in our series, and we're going to be focusing on gluttony today, as you can tell by the title. And I want to remind all of you, if this is the first episode that you're coming to, I highly suggest that you listen to the first episode in this series, which I believe was Sloth. But the reason why that episode is particularly important is because I explain what we're talking about when I'm describing the sin element of it. We're not talking about sinning like it's a morality issue. We're talking about connectivity to God. And so I go into great detail in that first episode that we did. So I just want to encourage you, if you've been looking through this series and you're like, ooh, I want to listen to Gluttony first. That's fine, but at least go listen to the first half of that first episode that I did. All right. The other thing that I wanted to mention here, I do have an update about the podcast. Several months ago, I alluded to this and I mentioned that I was wanting to rebrand the podcast, but I wasn't entirely sure what it was going to look like, what it was going to be. But I am very excited. I have finally figured out the title and what I want to do in this next iteration of the podcast. And I've also decided that I'm not going to archive this podcast. It would still be listenable, but it would just be, I was contemplating starting a completely fresh podcast with a different title and just letting this one sit as is. But I've decided to just transition the branding, rename this. And so I haven't fully decided if I'm going to be doing that maybe sometime in November, or if I'm looking more for a January launch date, like January 2026. So we'll see. I'm still working out some of the details, and part of it does depend in terms of the subject matter that I want to talk about over the next couple of months, which podcast it makes more sense under, like which title it makes more sense under. That is partly what will determine when I make the switch. For now, I'm very happy that I'm still chipping away at this 7 Deadly Sins series that we've been doing, just because it makes sense for Sunday Messages to host this series. So anyway, a lot of that has been on my mind, but there's going to be developments. And I know I have a lot of podcast fans out here. I know that I have not been the most diligent and consistent with my podcasting this year. And in all honesty, I feel like it's been kind of clunky for me podcasting wise. And now looking back at the situation and how everything has shaken out, I'm now able to see it was actually like growing pains for me. So I'm really excited for this next iteration of the podcast, because I really feel like my inspiration will be reinvigorated. I'll talk about this more later, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that rebranding is coming very soon. And with that, more podcasts from me. Now let's go ahead and dig into this gluttony that we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I did not understand this sin for a long time. Like, I understood, yeah, overeating isn't good, food addiction isn't good, but I didn't really understand in what way it was related to our relationship with God. That was the thing that was really stumping me. Because when I thought about gluttony, I was thinking about it more from that addiction lens. Like, it's addiction, it's numbness, it's compulsive behavior. You know, there's a lot of different ways that type of disordered eating can manifest itself within people. But if we're going to operate within this definition that I've been working with around sinning, which means to disconnect from God or to orient away from God. Anytime you orient away from God, that's a sin. At least this is how I've come to understand it. And we know this because it's like anytime we orient away from God, it doesn't feel good, right? When we disconnect from that, that's where the bad feeling comes from. And here's the other thing about this. It's not that every time we're in total harmony with God means that it's always going to be the most convenient feeling. Sometimes connection with God feels like that bittersweet truth, like that deep knowing, that deep sense of rightness, and that deep sense of clarity. But sometimes that deep sense of clarity and deep knowing can feel uncomfortable or scary or foreign, or it's not always the most pleasant because our bodies and minds really like complacency, the status quo, your comfort zone. And if you're being met with this divine truth that begins to shake things up, that doesn't always occur to us as pleasure until the pain of denying it becomes greater. So you might notice, for those of you who have been around for several years, or if you've watched my 7 Deadly Shadows series, and that was more of my spinoff of the 7 deadly sins. It was just a slightly different vantage point to look at things from. And when I did the 7 deadly shadows, I really chose things that I felt were all encompassing. Like when I was looking at all of these different ways that we disconnect from God, I tried to put them under these umbrella words and really use broad strokes of language in order to define some of the common human experiences that we have. The one sin that I could not make sense of was gluttony. And I thought about it. I was like, okay, maybe it makes sense under the codependency shadow that I talked about in that series. But there didn't feel like it didn't feel like gluttony had a clear counterpart in that series, is what I'm getting at. So now, this is something that I've sat with for quite a while, and I would revisit this topic of gluttony and try to make sense of it for years. And then earlier this year, in the group chat, when we were reading Outwitting the Devil, in that book was the first time that I started to understand gluttony. I didn't come into full clarity about it until several months after I read the book, but that was like the initial thing that started getting the wheels turning. So in Outwitting the Devil, one of the things that the devil is talking about is how when people overconsume food, it bogs them down. And so the way that the devil was describing it is when people are met with temptation to overindulge, to eat too much food, to overconsume, drink too much alcohol, whatever. There's a temptation to do that, and then the end result is them getting bogged down, them getting really slow, really sluggish. I don't remember the exact verbiage that was used, but that was the gist of it. Is it slows you down, it weighs you down, it makes you sluggish. Okay, so once again, like I read that in the book and it started to plant some seeds that I didn't fully understand yet. Because again, up to this point, I felt like the topic of gluttony kind of had this dismissive explanation. Like there wasn't deep reasoning. Anytime I heard someone talking about gluttony, I didn't feel like the reasoning and explanation was clear. And it just felt like this dismissive thing, like, it's not good for you. That's not what God would want for you. And to me, that's not actually a sufficient answer. Now, on one hand, we could say that gluttony is a form of self-abuse. So if you're in slut magic, then you know binge eating and that type of behavior is actually symptomatic of self-neglect in certain cases. So there's other energetic tones that are driving abuse around food, how you feed yourself, how you take care of your body, whether it's overeating, binge eating, or withholding food, restricting food. There's all sorts of distortions that come from these subtextual energetics that are underneath the behavior. So I feel like I have a pretty strong understanding of the energetics, but I'm still trying to bridge this thing about our relationship with God. Like, how does this interrupt your relationship with God? And there was one day that I'll never forget. I had just eaten a really filling meal, and then I sat down to meditate, and I couldn't get into the pocket. I couldn't get into that bliss point of meditation. My mind wasn't focused. I didn't feel clear, and that meditation felt so difficult. And then all of a sudden the clarity came over me. I was like, oh my God. When your body is literally full, think about it this way. Even though we're talking about your connection to God being a form of spiritual fullness, it almost felt like when you're overly stuffed with food or you have a lot of food in your system, there actually isn't any space for anything else. And I want to make it very, very clear. I'm not talking about being full of nourishing food or having a really satisfying meal with your family. Like, I love food. Like, food, there's so much tradition and culture and memories, and just food is a wonderful thing. So don't mistake what I'm saying. I'm not telling you that being full is a bad thing. Where gluttony is coming into this is when you're sustaining that fullness to the point where it interrupts, like it literally interferes with your connection to God, because it makes it more difficult to hear God. That's the best way that I can describe it. Like, if I eat a whole bunch of food and then I sit down, I won't be able to visualize very clearly with a full stomach, which I did not even realize was something that I couldn't do. Because typically after I'm eating after I eat a big meal, I don't want to sit down and meditate right after that, which is really interesting. That my natural tendency is to not do that. But then when I actually attempted it one day and it didn't work, I then put the pieces together. I was like, oh my God. I literally cannot do what I'm normally able to do when I'm overly full. Now, the other thing that I've noticed is that if I'm overly hungry, I have a really difficult time with it as well. And that's different than fasting. Fasting is kind of its own thing, especially when people are doing spiritual fasting. But fasting, after I had this experience, fasting started to make a lot of sense to me. Because if your system is completely empty and you're seeking spiritual sustenance, then it makes sense that you're actually going to make room for God in that moment. Whatever that is. Room for revelation, room for clarity, room for breakthrough, room for whatever. But you'll find that spiritual fasting, a lot of the time people would fast on particular issues that they had in their life. I'm not saying that you have to do that. My God, if every time I had a question I needed to fast, I would lose my mind. That's no way to live, in my opinion. However, there's a lot of different types of fasts, right? You can fast from alcohol, or many of you know, I'm famous for designing consumption fasting. Consumption fasting is very difficult, in large part because it creates so much space that people don't even know what to do with it. And that's part of the issue, right? Then there's also financial fasting. So, when people go through like a no-spend season, like a no-spend year, like only buying the absolute essentials and doing financial fasting, that's a form of fasting. So On one hand, we could broaden gluttony to say overconsumption, but the food topic was very, very, very interesting to me because I didn't have the awareness that when I was overly full of any type of food, and this is another point that I want to make, it doesn't actually have anything to do with the quality of food itself, although there is something to be said about if you are choosing foods that have an incongruent frequency. And I'm phrasing it that way very, very deliberately because it's not about there are some good foods and there's some bad foods. There's just foods that are an energetic match and foods that are not. It's not a morality thing because we all know that it's possible to have an experience where you do eat something that's really indulgent that you may not want to be eating every single day of your life because that probably wouldn't feel in alignment, but in the moment, it could have created a really wonderful experience. It could have created a beautiful memory. It could have been completely divine, right? So it's not about the specific foods. It's about where the decision is actually coming from. In the same way, you could take those same foods and abuse yourself with them or restrict them to the point of self-harm. There's all sorts of different tones of your experience and relationship with food. So I want to get away from this idea of the specific foods are what create the problem, or it's like a quality of food problem when really that's only half of it. The whole equation is a specific person in a specific moment in relationship to a particular food choice in that specific moment. And whether or not that food choice creates more harmony or more energetic distortion. And obviously with that, there's infinite contexts that people can be operating within, so there's no singular answer of right and wrong. Let's go a little bit more in depth on the sin element of all of this. And remember, in that first episode, I was really talking about the ways in which each of the 7 deadly sins creates a distraction. There's a temptation and a distraction in order to interrupt the communication between you and God, to cut you off from the highest possible action, to cut you off from the highest possible thought form. And when we're talking about being congruent with God, being in harmony with God, feeling a strong connection with God, it's like you do want to continually reach for the highest possible thought, the highest possible action in this moment, the greatest amount of unconditional love, so on and so forth. And anything that tempts you into disconnection is the sin part. That's the enemy tempting you. And the way that this happens with gluttony is when you don't just have normal garden variety thoughts of hunger, like, okay, it's time for me to feed myself, to nourish myself. I need some calories. I need some energy. That's totally normal. Where this becomes a temptation is when the food actually interrupts your purpose and your clarity. I'll give you an example of this, okay? Because this is a perfect time for me to insert this. So right now it's 6 p.m. And right before I got the go-ahead, like the internal yes to record this episode. But also, because it's dinner time, there was a thought that came up that I should eat first. But here's the thing. If I were to have had dinner before recording this, I would not be as clear as I am right now. I would not have the same amount of energy that I do right now. I would not be able to deliver my messages clearly if I was full or if I'm coming right off the heels of dinner. And so I knew that the best possible thing, the highest possible action is for me to record this first before I eat. Because I do know that it's it's not like food's gonna muddy my message or it's gonna ruin the podcast. It's not that serious, but it's just these little ways that we get a little bogged down or a little disconnected. Or here's another possibility of what could have happened. I could have eaten dinner. It would be delicious. It would be fine. And also, we're talking about high quality food, right? It's not something that's ultra indulgent or ultra heavy. It's nothing like that. We are talking about me feeding myself really well. And even with that, I know that right after dinner, I am going to be less likely to act on something like this. I'm going to be less likely to record a podcast. And so we could say the temptation for me to prioritize food over the highest possible action in this moment is the quote unquote enemy at work, right? That's the temptation that I have to say no to, because the clarity of my message, the clarity of the action that I'm engaging in right now is actually what is the highest contribution. It's the highest contribution to my life. It's the highest contribution to my work in the world. It's the highest contribution to you. That's really where the magic is happening. And like I said earlier, staying congruent with God means choosing the highest possible action moment by moment by moment. So when I first started recording this episode, that was the highest possible action in that moment. And then after I get done here, then eating dinner will be the next highest possible action that I'm going to take. And another thing that I want to mention here, please do not take this so seriously that you get freaked out. Okay, that is not helpful. Seriousness is not supportive to your connection to God. Okay, it's also not supportive to the highest possible action now. The thing that I want to offer you here is just notice the ways that right after meals, your motivation takes a little dip. And then start to contemplate, okay, if my motivation took a little dip, like if I waited to complete that task until after food and then after I eat, I don't really want to do it. And if you were to do that over and over and over and over, even multiple times a day, you'll notice that like, okay, now this is something that is actually interfering in the most subtle of ways with your highest possible purpose, with your highest possible action, the highest possible calling, or the ways in which you will delay, like you'll get maybe an intuitive hit to do something, you'll get some instructions, you'll feel that impulse of what to do next, but instead you'll say, no, I need to eat first, and then you won't end up doing it. It's so, I swear to you, when you start paying attention to this, it's going to blow your mind. So it's actually changed my approach to when I eat. And I know that if I get a little impulse to do something or a little spark of motivation, like, yeah, I get that thing done right now. And then there's this intrusive, it's not really an intrusive thought, but it's this interrupting thought that encourages me to eat first, or it says you need to eat first instead. I know that's a distraction. I know that's not correct. Yeah, my God, I'm not starving. It's not like my blood sugar is crashing. We're talking about maybe delaying food by a few minutes for the sake of doing something else. How long have I been talking? It's been 24 minutes that I've been recording. I'm still not even that hungry. What I'm doing right now is vastly more important than having eaten earlier, even though my dinner is going to be really delicious. It's going to make me feel good. I'm so excited to have it. All of those things are true. But I just know, because I got that, yes, record the Gluttony episode right now. Like, now is the time to do it. I'm ready to speak on it. I have full clarity about this. It's go time. I had to act on that and I had to prioritize that. So the interesting thing about gluttony is I think a lot of the time people simply think about the overindulgence element of it rather than the spiritual fullness component, or the ways in which it just makes you a little tired. It just makes you, the timing that you eat will just make you barely tired enough to kill your motivation for certain things. That's the trap. It's not actually about you behaving like a gluttonous monster and eating 6 pizzas by yourself. Of course, that's a very extreme version of this, but it could be something like you are allowing yourself to be distracted by food, to be tempted by food, instead of just taking 2 seconds to follow the impulse of what would actually be good for you right now. It could be choosing, no, I'm not going to send that email right now, or I'm not going to follow up about that opportunity, which might be your freaking dream coming true, and instead choosing a snack in the moment. It has nothing to do with the snacks being bad or the food being bad. It has to do with your timing, the timing of the distracting thought. Is this actually the time for fullness? Or would it be more beneficial in this moment to have some emptiness? Like right now, for me recording this podcast, it's really good that I'm not full. It's really good that I'm clear. It's really good that I followed my motivation in the moment that I had it. It's good that I'm following this impulse. It's good that I'm delivering what feels right to deliver right now, and I acted on it promptly. And I did not delay this, because had I delayed this with choosing to eat dinner first, you understand this entire podcast changes if I make that one decision. The words coming out of my mouth right now would not exist if I chose to eat dinner and then recorded the podcast. Or, let's be honest, eating dinner first probably would have killed my motivation to do this, because I wasn't acting on it promptly, and then who knows when I would record this. But no matter what, it would be different, because my podcasts aren't scripted. I'm not looking at notes right now. This is just me riffing on everything that I know about this. And this is something that I've been in deep experimentation with for several months now. And so instead of looking at gluttony as like being gluttonous, overfilling yourself, even though it's like, yeah, obviously that's driven by some type of distorted thought form or a distorted belief or addiction or trauma, right? There's all sorts of reasons why people might be behaving in that way. But we're also just talking about these subtle, tempting thoughts that are distracting you from what is the highest in this possible moment in thought, feeling, and action. And so that's actually the more sinister side of this, is the subtle temptation. The, no, don't do that, just have a snack first. No, it's lunchtime. It's not necessarily that you're going to miss out on some blockbuster opportunity. But again, if you think about the micro action and then stacking it every day, now we're talking about a lot of delay. Now it's like you're really starting to delay your blessings if you're doing this 3 times a day, 4 times a day, 5 times a day. Who knows how many times? Like, how often are you allowing yourself to be distracted by food? By the thought of food, the anticipation of food, wondering about food, contemplating the morality about food, worrying about food, thinking about calories. It's like a lot of the excessive rumination that is going on about food ultimately is a distraction. And of course, I'm talking about this from a spiritual lens, right? I'm talking about this from the framework of what is creating interference with your relationship with God, which is very different than someone taking a therapeutic or emotional approach to this. But it is just something else to contemplate. And once again, I really, just to cover my own ass, I want to make this really clear. Nourishing yourself is super important. Yes, eating food is super important, and not using food as a way to abuse or neglect yourself is very, very, very important. Just pay close attention to the timing. Pay close attention to when you all of a sudden have thoughts about food and where you want to put food first. You literally want to put food above your calling, above your inspiration, above the creator of the universe that's animating you and is trying to bring you closer to all of these dreams that you would like to bring to life, because that's what those impulses are trying to do. And pay attention when you feel like, and this works in both extremes actually. This works when you're overfull, like on the heels of eating, and this also works when you're super, super, super hungry, you're really restricting, you're not taking care of yourself, and you're either abusing or neglecting yourself in terms of restriction. You will also notice it fucks with your connection and it tampers with your impulses. Right? Because, and I've talked about this a lot, it's like if you're not feeding yourself properly and then all of a sudden your blood sugar is crashing and you're not thinking clearly, it's like that's going to jack up all your decision making. Now it's like you're not even in the right frame of mind. Now you don't have the energy required to act on the things that you are meant to be acting on right now. And this is an ecosystem that you want to pay attention to. I know that many of you, as I've gone through this series, have really commented. I've received DMs from people, different messages in different places where people have really loved when I talk about the subtle distractions and the subtle temptations rather than like the big obvious ones. And so I really hope that I was able to bring that to you today and get you to think about gluttony in a slightly different way. Because I think for many people, when you have this like gluttonous monster caricature in your mind, there's many of you that really don't relate to that. That it's kind of like, yeah, well, I don't really do that. But that's not what we're talking about. We are talking about subtle temptation and subtle distraction that is pulling you away from the highest possible action right now. And food is one of the easiest ways to do that because it's so pervasive. It's like there's no getting away from food. You need to eat. And so, of course, that's one of the sneakiest places for distraction to live. And my invitation for all of you is just pay attention when you get the impulse to do something, like what I said earlier. Do you feel that there's that thought that comes in that starts trying to tempt you with food instead? And start to play with the idea of, what if you choose the highest possible action right now as you're inspired and just see what happens. See what happens to your productivity. See what happens to the synchronistic nature of your life. Just experiment with it. And then the same thing, maybe you're in the opposite camp where you are getting the impulse, okay, it's time to eat, and then you don't listen. You're not obedient to that either. And then all of a sudden your mood crashes, your energy crashes, you're shaky, you're cranky, and it starts jacking up your entire day. Pay attention to that too, because eating is also a highest possible action, but it's always going to be relative to what's going on. All right, my friends, that is all for now. I have lots of good stuff going on right now. We have in-person events going. I have a retreat happening in February at, my God, it is just, the resort is out of this world. Gorgeous. I would love to have you there. I have 5 spots available. You can go check that out. Lightspeed, the second half of that program is starting next week. So the first 3 calls, we were focused on low frequency. I just finished the 3rd call today, and then we're going to be starting the second half and we're shifting into high frequency. So I'm super excited for those. Those are still going on right now. And, I have a bunch of fun stuff that's in the incubator right now. So stay tuned, check everything out. I'll make sure to link it in the show notes, in the description box. I appreciate you all. If this resonates with you, if you know anyone who would like to hear this or this would be helpful for them, please send it their way. And that's a wrap. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.